Hello. In episode 9.3 of Airs for Architecture, I spoke with architect, artist, writer and teacher Tom de Paor about his practice, particularly his ongoing project, Desert, or Desert, an exquisite and mysterious thing that a little bit resists definition, but will feature in ANU in the coming spring, and was the subject of a gorgeous wee book as part of Peter Maybury's Notation series with Gaul editions, and also his Palace Cinema in Galway.
Aids for Architecture, a podcast about architecture, buildings, urban culture and space.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Airs for Architecture. I'm talking today to Tom de Paor. Tom, would you be so kind as to introduce yourself?
My name is my name is Tom de Paor, but it's actually Paor in English, which is perfect. And I'm an architect, and I do various things. I've designed buildings, and I make little pictures, and I most recently have become involved in gardening. I also collaborate with a man called Peter Maybury under Gaul. We make exhibitions, small books and films. So I have an interest in lots of aspects of the subject.
So you are based in Dublin, but do you come from Dublin? Are you of Dublin?
No. I was born in London, and
Which part?
Brixton.
Uh-huh.
And so when I was 8, we moved back West Clare, where my father was from, and my mother was from Mayo. And so I grew up in the west of Ireland, and then came to Dublin when I went to architecture school.
I see. So you did all your studies in Ireland?
Yes, I did 1 year. I did a year out in Milan as a student, which I really enjoyed.
I bet.
That was great. Looking at, well, at the time I was fascinated by Rossi, of course, and then that became an interest in Tirani, but just being in the whole kind of culture of design left a big impact on me.
And it's a big industrial city, Milan, as well. It's quite a different kind of space for someone from West Ireland.
Yeah, which was great. You know, it was great, and it's very dense. And I like what I really enjoyed was working in the office. I worked for Emilio Battisti, and I enjoyed just being part of that. You know, that was when we were drawing by hand and so on. I was just a junior draftsman, really. But just being around the way they thought about making drawings and making coffee and, you know, making pieces of furniture and, you know, meeting people like Vico Magistretti and so on. It was, it was great.
A different way of doing architecture. I mean, I think a lot of the way that people experience, particularly students experience architecture now, is a fairly instrumentalized approach where you're kind of stuck into an office and tied to a computer and economized in a kind of rather different way. But that is now, and that was then, where it was easier, more social, a different kind of tone to architecture.
I think so. I think so. I mean, from that end of the telescope, I was, you know, sitting opposite the guy who did the drawings for Teatro del Mondo, so I was just fascinated in how he drew, you know, and how precisely he drew, and and not sweating on the mylar. So it was a really sort of there was no engagement with contracts or clients or any of those things. It was really quite abstract about making beautiful drawings. And when you completed the drawing, Emilio would come over and look at it for a moment, and then he would reach into his beautiful jacket and take out his beautiful pen and sign it on the bottom right hand side, and you kind of go.
Very elegant. Have you carried that through that kind of?
Oh, I don't even have a jacket. But that's
let alone a beautiful pen.
but but that was very, very important. That was very important, and you can see it in the work that was made. And we can go around and look at all of these things, and that was the information,
Mm-hmm.
and they were treasured and so on. And the person who could draw the best, and the person who could draw the fastest, and the person who could draw the most precisely was. Maybe that's the same way with computers, but by hand, or not using a cross-hatching machine, doing it freehand, like ooh, the kind of stamina and discipline of that. But no. I'm not sure in the end that's just nostalgia. I'm not sure in the end that's really really much of a loss. But I think that that office anyway, they were very social places. It was still a bunch of young people, you know, finding ways to meet one another and talk about things and copy things and learn things. And there was all, I'm sure that still exists.
Well, one would hope so, but that there is that idea around particularly hand drawing. So this was in what, the early 90s?
No, late 88, 89.
It
Yeah.
just strikes me that kind of that care that goes into particularly hand drawings. I mean, the way that you had to be precise, because scratching out with a
Hmm.
razor blade
Hmm.
and then rubbing it down, and then that was hard work. Whereas obviously if you're on as soon as you've got a computer and a printer involved, you can just churn stuff out. And I've seen you see that massive kind of, it's sort of a precision and a slackness all in one go. Whereas I mean, I don't want to kind of impose my own view of your work, but there is a kind of care about your work still, which isn't like that commercial BIM
Hmm.
AutoCAD hellscape that architecture is rather now.
Yeah, I run away from that. I run away from that as far as I can. It just makes me anxious. I think the speed at which information is assembled and so on.
Mm.
I don't know. I mean, even then though, there were different, I suppose, tyrannies. And there was a different, maybe knowledge base, and there were probably different concerns, and it was much more straightforward. I mean, one could build it like that building we were talking about in Bowie. Like the drawings for it are there's two, maybe um, three drawings for a house. That's it. Uh, Three A1s. Now it's the depth of documentation that you need to actually describe a contract, let alone invent it, is remarkable. But I don't remember much revisions either. Like I don't remember. I don't remember. I remember it being done once.
Mm-hmm.
So there was probably
There was probably
a sense of this is the way we do things. This is
mm,
what's possible within the realm. This is the order. We work within this. That there was no. I don't remember any kind of flashes of lightning of inspiration, or I don't remember any of that, or revising things, or changing it around, or even much discussion about party or whatever. It was all competition based anyway, as I recall. So maybe that had a fixity about it.
yeah.
But yeah, yeah. Um, how 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 buildings are procured now, how information is made now. What I'm doing is I have some friends who we would work on bigger contracts. They would make the drawings. I don't use a computer, so I would just do little hand drawings and review drawings then on the wall and do markups. I never learned how to draw on a computer. I don't know whether that was an actual decision or not. I just can't see it in there.
You sent me a couple of articles about the Palace Theatre in Galway that you've done, and it was strange because you sent me these two articles, these two reviews of it. And perhaps we can talk about the building itself. But then on the same day, for some particular reason, I think on either Instagram or Twitter, I saw news pop up of BDP's new master plan for Galway, and I thought, and it didn't look, there was a very clear difference between the Galway that I visited, and I understood your building within that context, and then this new plan, £240 million master plan or whatever it is. But maybe we can do, which, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to say anything too contentious or libelous, but it didn't seem very Galway to me.
No,
I don't know if you've seen it.
no, I haven't seen it. No, this is probably at the Docklands and so on. No. So what's the question?
Well, I was just wondering whether we could talk about the Palace Theatre, because I thought maybe we could come across to your project Desert or Dies Art in a bit, but maybe talk about the Palace Theatre.
Yeah.
What the objective? I mean,
What was the objective? Yeah. The palace took the palace was the brainchild of a lady called Lelia Doolan and her and various parties of like the Galway Film Festival. So there was a group that really wanted to enshrine the critical film culture that is Galway, the film flower. And to make a public building, they'd always rented an old ballroom called the Clada Palace, and to make a public building that was art house, open-ended, a service to schools, boon to the community, an old-fashioned cinema in the sense of a picture palace with a good bar and a tea shop and some good rooms to see films of various sizes, and that it would be in the inner city, that it would be in walking distance, that it would be beside the main street or beside the river, and that it would be a piece of town. And because Galway is it is a very particularly convivial town, and particularly in the festival times. So Lelia, for instance, the brief was okay. It was get as many seats as you can in there and provide all the other things, but the essence of the brief was that it was going to be called the Palace, the Picture Palace. So that sort of summons up kind of a kind of an architecture of signs and letters and posters and theatre, basically, or when that kind of time when cinema was shown in old theatres. So there was a sort of a kind of an interest in making a place that was knitted in and kind of complex, that you could get sort of lost in it. And the kind of sense of, when you go to the theatre or you go to a gig in a theatre or something, you go in the front door and you find your place, but you end up going out another door and coming back down and arriving in an alleyway to refine yourself. And so that kind of that was kind of like, that kind of was an alibi for a site that was too small for its brief, really, in that it was very difficult to make. I couldn't find a way to make, or I didn't want to make, I don't know, again, if that was a decision, but it made sense to stack it. And because of the fire requirements in terms of stack the boxes, stack the rooms, so you have a little tower. And the analogy is, of course, to these kind of tower houses, which have mural staircases, which is a kind of a type that you have in Scotland as well. Many on the west coast of Ireland. So they have mural staircases. Can would have been fond of them. So you have a pure room, and then you pack the staircases in the interstices of the outer form. And that obviously allows then for a well-tempered room in the center, which is the cinema or the bar. And then it allows all the other stuff to actually, in this case, not be tempered at all. So it's outside, it's not insulated. And sometimes it's not even glazed. And sometimes it's just really outside. And then the wriggling around in the found of the medieval footprint, well, early Georgian footprint, allowed those staircases to sort of fulfill their potential for being places of encounter and places to cross view and places of natural light and places of views out to the city, but also then kind of interstices between the inner world, generating, what those journalists describe as, I think, magic, but I think some people find it confusion. But and then there's a lot of gaming in it about point of view, because I was really interested, of course, in cinema. My wife works in film, and just the point of view and all the things you can do with it. And so within the geometry of the thing, in section and in plan, there's a lot of not forced, well, forced perspectives maybe, but there's a lot of attention to what you can see or what you can't see or what you shouldn't see or what you think you might be seeing. And then there are moments when it snaps into kind of completely figured, fixed view where you go, aha. And then it goes on then to become, because then of this idea that it's kind of like an onion. You've got the outer circulation, which is untempered. It means then that the layers of temperance, but from artificial air and light to natural air and light and acoustic control and thermal control, they can all be layers that can be shed. So the detailing starts to pull them all away from the main carcass, which is in situ concrete. And then all the windows are jockeyed with as well. Then visually, I worked with Pat Scott. So they're not stained glass, but they're colored so that they're pictures. So at nighttime, it becomes a kind of, all the windows are the same size in the building. They're all the same. The opening is the same. But then within them, they become figured as, and they're coded. So one staircase is like the main staircase they're all reds and pinks and purples. So you feel a little bit, like sashaying or something. But then the back staircase, they're blues and greens, for instance. And in the bar, they're all yellows and ambers. And so they're making the atmosphere. The natural light they're lensed projections, just like you would do if you were shooting a scary movie or happy scene.
It's quite it's an interest. I mean, I think the way it was described in one of the articles, rigorous and eccentric choreography, which I thought was quite a nice kind of paradox, and perhaps that I was wondering about that as a kind of image in the city. So you mentioned Rossi to begin with. You've got the kind of the postmodern architectural idea of architecture as symbol.
Yeah.
And your building is both symbolic of its function. It is big and a palace theatre, but at the same time, it sort of subverts that kind of urban language by using, as you say, cast concrete, by having this kind of slightly discrepant organization of windows on the facade, and then this idea of these kind of staircases. And these moments within it. There's a kind of deeply, would it be fair to say, sort of anti-hierarchical, if not subversive, intention within it, to take a kind of a typology, perhaps an expectation, and
there's a shift.
With it.
There's a shift. There's one shift in the section, which is, what was the phrase again? Rigorous but eccentric. Eccentric?
Yeah.
That was the word. Yeah. There's one shift in the section which, if it was made, the building would be clearer and would feel smaller.
Uh-huh.
If it was, but as I chose to do it, it makes it bigger and more confusing.
Yeah.
So it's not a space. It's a space to get to know. It's a building to get to know. It's like, the kick of. I mean, it's not like Venice, but you know what I mean. That kind of thing where you actually have to learn it. It's not. It doesn't have the, for good or bad, I'm not sure, but it doesn't want you to be able to draw a diagram of it on the back of a notebook.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have that modernist concern with it wants to make its own concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And so the running man as a sign becomes a beautiful thing, which it is. You know what I mean? Like, so you get into this whole thing of like, where does the signage stop and where does the drawing stop? Like right down to the the yellow line on the staircases. So the thing becomes completely compulsively over. It's more like Burgess than anything else. Like, I mean, I'm very interested in Burgess's masterpiece in Cork, St. Finbarr's, which is a total work of art, as they call it. But I mean, he goes at it in so many different ways, and it's actually kind of similar. Like, we're trying to make a really civic building that's a landmark, but with a small L, and that it's actually within the language actually, or a selected language actually, of a kind of a vernacular. The front house is kept and cut away as the offices, so you come in under the building, and then there's a kind of a tower house behind that, which is again a small building really, but lumpy. It's got a certain kind of a window that's it's more like a metope really, but you would see them on silo buildings. So it's kind of familiar. It's not pretty in the normal sense, but it has its own order. And I saw this great opportunity to make this kind of thing that actually was about Galway, as I thought it was, and about Lelia and her cohort, as I thought it was, and about actually the magic of going to the pictures and that kind of complex. Potentially, like we went to see lots of little old cinemas, like where what's that one on Rue Ursuline, where the early surrealists were hanging out and so on. And it's all about curtains and little stages, and it's almost domestic in a way, these things. And you turn on a hoop. So the kind of American deco image of walking in and the big thing wasn't available to us anyway. So I tried to kind of like make the foyer, like there's no foyer, it's outside. You meet in a little square that's trapped between the new building and the old building. You meet outside and people go, but this isn't a foyer. And what happens when it rains? But it's raining a foot away. It's raining outside the door, inside the door. It's just a piece of town. You come up some stairs and buy a coffee and go in a door, but that's where you meet. That's where your date is waiting or whatever. So there was a kind of a compaction of these things in the interest of basically it's on the edge of the medieval town. So I thought, as many have before, the Middle Ages give some kind of license. I thought, let's go into this thing, and this is the place to do it. I mean, I did a building around the corner as well. I did Druid Theatre. I reworked that, which is sections of that are actually from that period. and the complexities of getting in and out and the foyer and so on, were only a preamble for this building. So I see this building in my kind of a reading of a romantic city, I suppose, and it's a romantic early 20th century program. Um, 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 uh, and it divides, I think, which is really interesting. Some people say I got lost, I loved it. Some people say I got lost, I didn't like it. Or people, but that's okay, right? It's only a little building.
Yeah, it's a little building, but with I very much like this idea. I mean, two of the things I was thinking about, this word encounter, which I think is very very nourishing as a word for architects, and doesn't, it does seem like a sort of categorically different type or a way of approaching architecture than that hierarchical modernist thing of kind of clear lines and so on and so forth. So generating an architecture of encounter, I think, is
it goes back to your initial kind of tease, I think, about the development plan, and not about identity per se or vernacular per se, but what is the genius loci? Like, how do you make a building in a place that actually is of the place? How do you, when you go to Galway, everybody ends up in Knockton, and it's an incredible room made out of snugs and furniture, and the counter is too high and the furniture is too low, and the whole thing is packed, and the bodies make the space in the kind of compaction of the thing. And you look outside and the way the elevation is made, and it's a very much an Argo classicism, brought down. There's a lot of paint, a lot of overlay. Things don't meet. It's brilliant. It's fantastic. Yeah. I'm kind of going. I'm so in the way. In the back of my mind, I'm trying to think that out. So, people say. I remember somebody saying, "But Galway is a stone town." And I was looking at them, kind of going, "Have you been to Galway lately? Like, it's not." There's very little stone, and if you want to make an analogy with concrete, it's quite easy. But I think there is a kind of a fun, and not a duty or a requirement but a setting is a difference is good, and difference can be encouraged, and there are lots of things to learn from what's around. That's kind of smart and fast and provocative, weirdly, in the way that I don't know. Marky Smith isn't so intimidating when you realize that it's really just Bo Diddley.
I quote you on that. The other thing that I was wondering about. So when you were talking about this idea of the building sort of slowly revealing itself, like in a traditional theatre or a traditional picture house, where as you go round a corner, there is a sense that something new something new has to be done because a new note has been thrown into the mix.
Yeah, but you have to be brought around the corner. The thing that you are into this thing of choreography where you're setting up notes, or it's always setting up, and going back can't be the same as. It can't be just the reverse of going up. So it becomes really, really interesting. Even the way the handrails change, the rhythm of you can pace the space through the rhythm of the spandrels on a handrail, for instance, or how they relate to the steps. And and obviously the repetition of these window openings that change color, so you kind of know it, but it's changing. So these things, I think, probably affect the perception. They're not the perception, but it's kind of corner of eye kind of understanding of things. Like, I notice it here. If I put down too many stones and somebody walks, people don't want. Visually, they want it to be very clear underfoot. Like you can't, if you make it very busy, they slow down and they
Mm.
get conscious of their feet. Do you know what I mean? So when you look at an image of, I don't know, a Murray garden in Tokyo or something, and you see this arrangement of stones, they're so have to be so super precise to have pleasure in them. So going back then, the choreography of those kind of spaces where you come in, where the handrail is offered, how it moves up, where's the first window, get to that window, and by the time I've started to turn with the handrail, I can see the next one, and the next one has changed to a deeper red, and there's something there. You know, it's that kind of consideration.
Is this, I mean, were you in any way influenced by ideas within phenomenology, this idea that of a reality unfolding to the senses as you encounter it? I mean, I don't want to
Yeah, I know.
impose, and I know that's very 90s kind of phenomenology thinking, although perhaps it shouldn't be, but this other idea about perhaps a less scientific, more emotive, sensory, sensual way of being in the world. Did you ever even think about this?
I know that that's the way I think about it, and it leads to all kinds of problems, as you can well imagine. Um, um, uh, it's in the end, you, I mean, one can never tell. You can't tell, of course, but doesn't one want to just make something just as lovely as possible that somebody else can really enjoy it and feel comfortable in it?
Mm.
So that would be the kind of motivation of it. And you're left with your own kind of registers, I suppose, and maybe a tendency to over egg it. But the motivation is to get them from A to B to C and back again, and in the meantime have had a really great experience that they kind of go, oh, I'd like to do that again.
Yeah.
But
It's an interesting
I
idea.
think that that's not. I don't. The phenomenology thing and so on makes it into something a bit sort of po-faced or something. I think it's just kind of actually common sense that that the door is not the door is good and the room is amazing and you know, and there's peace there or it sounds good or whatever. I mean that they're the kind of challenges. So you kind of I would have, you know, you know, you're back into kind of like the work of you know, we talk about like it's you know it's master architects like Leverance who I would think about,
Mm.
you know, Sarah Fenn, really it's
Mhm.
that kind of level of intelligence that I find inspiring
Uh-huh. Yeah,
rather than the theory.
and people by the sound of it. I the You've got this thing coming out in architecture and urbanism next year, which I don't know anything much about, but you said you had a spread coming out in there about your project Desert,
Yeah.
which is a rural idyll that you are constructing.
Mm, yeah, it's funny because it's not. I mean, rural in Ireland is a really strange term. It's not like in England. Like it's more like sub-rural or something. It's kind of does. It's a kind of a like suburbia has a kind of a very wide uh, wide wavelength here. So this place where I'm sitting now is uh, it's on the edge of a town. So it's on a what do you call it? A ribbon development, and but it's the remains of what would have been one of the big farms or farms around on this hillside. It's the yard of a farm, so it's but it is rural in that there are it's the edge of the green belt, and then it goes up into the mountains. So there's less and less houses, and there are, lots of trees, and the sea is down there, and so on. But it's not rural in the sense of tractors and silage, and that, not really. It's kind of pet landscape for amenity value.
That's a good way. Pet landscape, as in landscape you can pet. Or
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I'm afraid so.
That's a hard sell. So it's sort of like a semi-wilderness suburban garden.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, this place is, well, it's just the yard that's been, there's a yard. It was a piggery, and there's a yard and a bit of an orchard, a few trees, and what was a hen house, and then loads of kind of ranges of buildings that were pens, all in concrete, and then there was a loft, and then this room here was the garage where apparently they kept the first truck that was ever in Greystones, and he used to collect pigs in this truck in this room, and then deliver them into town, into the city, where all the institutions had their own slaughterhouses.
Mm-hmm.
So he would have had contracts to provide, 2 pigs to the matter, whatever. And then it became a builder's yard in the 80s. When we bought it, it was a builder's yard. So there was a hay barn and all that, but it was just full of machines and full of bits of salvage, bits of stuff, bits of walls that were bought to sell on. And it was in a terrible state, quite poisoned. And then we got it and kind of cleared it out, and cleared it out of all the machines and whatnot, kept all the stones and all the steel and all the bits of wood and so on, and started planting it and adjusting it. So the loft, the hay barn, became a living room, a kitchen living room with 2 little bedrooms in it, and then another building became another bedroom. The hen house became another little guest bedroom. This is a kind of the studio office, and then various bits of it are, and then, well, I suppose the main move was, so it's on a hillside, so there's 14 meters fall across it. So which I put in 2 big retaining walls, which kind of inscribed into this kind of nice bow tie type shape on plan, inscribe a walled garden down the section into it. So it just dropped basically, not a square, but, and that allowed all the demolitions to become fill in one area. So nothing left aside in terms of concrete. And then it actually sets up microclimates, of course, and you get hortus conclusus, of course, but you also get a way of walking around it that kind of cuts the original arrangement. So it becomes then a suite of rooms, really, I suppose. I mean, I'm not as skilled. I don't, those kind of gardens that have, herbaceous borders and that kind of complexity is beyond me. I'm not interested in that. But it just becomes basically a totalized sequence of spaces that interlock, and you walk around them. And there's a couple of ponds made in it as well to develop the 3 ponds made to develop the life in the place. It's very dry, so they're just basically big water holders, rainwater holders. And then the rest of it is about how to move around in it, and then I suppose and then within that it becomes about an order of planting, and then within the buildings it becomes about an order of inhabitation, whatever kind that is, and then whether they're glazed or not, and then whether they're painted or not, and then if they're not, and then if there's new bits of concrete, like for underpinning or whatever, how they're treated. Sometimes they're distressed, and then there's kind of drawing on them. So the whole thing starts to become an ornamental garden in the worst sense of the word.
It seems like before we started recording, you talked about, you'll have to correct me on my pronunciation. Both Bowie?
Oh, her boy, yes, yeah.
Robin Walker.
Yes.
Has a similar kind of character of a series of buildings, not as pavilions, but as they're sort of internalized parts of the landscape that you can get shelter in, but the building as a whole constitutes both the constructed spaces and the landscape around it and the views beyond it. Yeah,
the Boher Bui is highly recommended. It's a absolute masterpiece. But what's very interesting about it is that it unhooks the idea of the program of dwelling as being in one object. That sealed object. It has it has three new buildings and three old buildings.
Mm-hmm.
But sitting in an existing landscape that's absolutely spectacular. So this one, I've been going there since I was a student. It's an incredible place, and it's for rent, as I was saying. You can holiday there, so it's worth looking out. And Robin is a remarkable architect, or was a remarkable architect. This is different in that Borobui doesn't really have the concerns of being a total project because the landscape is a temperate rainforest, untouched, absolutely extraordinary. There's a couple of camellia bushes, but basically it's wilderness. And then the existing buildings are old stone sheds that have been kind of fictionalized slightly, which is kind of great. And the new buildings are, 1971, so they're monopitches up on legs, glazed to the north, interestingly, where the sea is. But they are rationalized in terms of the contour and the space they make between themselves in a very organic way. Here, it's a different kind of thing in that the landscape is constructed as well. There's a relationship with the sea and the hill, but the terrain is completely constructed and driven by extraneous forces like paths. Paths are just low walls. Walls are just unroofed buildings, and so on and so forth. So that the thing is totally constructed, totally artificial.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense. So, but in terms of dwelling, yes, it has this, it has this thing where I walk across the yard to another room. I walk across that yard again to go to sleep. It has that, but here it's working. It starts at the gate.
Really interesting. To ask a very obvious question, why desert? Why and is it pronounced Dysart?
Well, it's desert. It's desert or desert. It's desert, obviously in English. It's desert in Irish. So the Anglo-Irish pronunciation of desert is dysert or dysert, or it's all phonetics really. But it is there are a lot of them around where I was growing up, like it's towns like called Killadysert, and there's Dysert Tola, and they're all based on where generally 6th century, often English or Welsh Christian came to Ireland and then went into the wilderness. So it's which comes from the Coptic thing, where you would go in, the Coptic monks would go into the desert. They would leave the monastery, they would leave society, and they would go in to an ascetic thing. So it's a hermitage. But in Irish, wilderness means desert. I just thought when we got there, it was called Darcy's Yard. That was the name of the place. And I think the naming of things, going back to even the palace or whatever, the naming of things is actually a very nice way into, we have the privilege of doing it only a few times, really, don't we? Whether it's children or places or whatever. But it's a great sort of creative act, possibly. So I thought it was nice. I thought it was nice, and I thought it was funny then, desert. And then I was showing you the hieroglyph of it, which is just fantastic. So, as a drawing.
Did you carve that yourself?
Yeah, I carved that myself from the casting. Yeah, which is fun. But you get so you get to draw into the thing, and it's it's really old fashioned. It's like Jarman putting John Donne on the side of Prospect Cottage. It's that kind of stuff. You're into that whole terrain of a certain kind of husbandry, cultural husbandry, actually, that's within is within a very long tradition, and it's really enjoyable. You can dress a shed up as a temple, like Ian Hamilton Finlay or something. You just draw volutes on it, and suddenly it just happens, and it has no pressure on it, and the weather will take the paint off, and so it's lovely.
But it's again, so this word desert and this idea of wilderness, and then your descriptions of it before as a sort of a total work of art, to use another phrase that you used earlier, where everything is mediated. There is, in fact, no wilderness at all. It's all garden.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that it's really interesting to think about this thing of wilderness. I mean, I think the statistic on, I think it works like this. It has to be something like 70% of the original habitation, the original vegetation over 10,000 hectares or something is the definition of wilderness. Like, it's nothing. It's nothing. And then you get into original and so on, or you get into invasive species and so on, or you get into going to the garden center and so on. And the thing just kind of explodes in terms of a terrain to think in, piped water, electric light, all of this stuff. It's just super interesting. So for me, anyway, I think it's easiest because I'm not. I mean, it's nice to cut the hedges and thicken them up or whatever, and they look lovely when they're horizontal, but they look lovely when they're just growing. And so I don't really need to get to the place where the thing is actually an architectural object in the way that some gardens kind of become. It's more again about the spatial experience. So pieces of it are quite sharp, but pieces of it are in the kind of Tarzan and Jane way or Adam and Eve way, wilderness. Mm-hmm. But I think that if the meaning is the Irish meaning, desert or desert, it's about solitude. Or some kind of solitude, some kind of singularity. And it's actually about control in the end. Inverted, but control.
Can you explain that?
Well, I think, yeah, to be able to control what you see is part of what gardens do, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So that excludes things. It actually excludes things, and it includes things. Mm-hmm. So the manipulation of that is kind of the project in a way, that you are making a total world, a total thing that controls all of its edges. Mm. in, or or lets them in or whatever, but it's still sort of control. And I'm kind of fascinated by that, and how gardens do and don't do that, and where's the long view and where's the short view, and where's the turn, and how does that happen? When you go even to those greatest estates, or you go to, say, for instance, um, Mises' Farnsworth House. It's really surprising, the motorway and the sound of the motorway.
Yeah, there seems to be, the way that you're talking about this garden, it seems to be very architectural, in that you talk about it as almost as if moving through it, you are moving through a series of discrete spaces which you are master of.
Yeah,
kind of terrific idea.
yeah, they're all like, the whole thing is, do you remember the when I was a student, I was really taken by, like, I did a zoo for my thesis. I realized that sometimes you're always doing the same project over, but when I was doing that, the La Villette competition, the La Villette scheme by
Shoemaker.
yeah, but not that one. The OMA one that came second, I think. That is so brilliant.
Yeah.
That has remained in my kind of mind as a way of overlay and programming simultaneously. So here, like, it's not exactly situationist, but it's like all the agapantha are in one geometry, all the U, all the beach, everything. So the whole thing is planted as a code. So it's when it superimposes, when you get beach meeting U, like beach east west, U north south, agapantha east west, birch, suddenly it makes its own place on the logic of the planting. So that goes right through the whole again, from the gate, that goes right the way through. So then specimens are rarely that, they reoccur. So you're into a new kind of landscape, actually, because it has its own order. That's only one only starts to realize it. Like, there's what, let me see now, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's like 11, 12, 13 yew hedges, for instance. There's probably a half a kilometer of hedge there, just in yew. But by the end it becomes, of course, or will be, of course, a small labyrinth. But it begins as just a boundary. And so, but they're always repeating on the same geometry. So there are moments when you're below where you can start to see these things track up. And you kind of go, okay, so suddenly the bigger order emerges. And then the buildings are within that as actually smaller kind of encapsulations within an order that's set down by the original order of the farmyard and then the field pattern. So it's that kind of gardening.
Yeah.
But on a small scale, it's miniature. Like, I'm always surprised when people come in. It's a bit like, it's a bit like in Dungeness when the little miniature railway goes by. Like, people come in, I kind of go, gosh, everybody's really big. So I've got the scale. The scale is really weird. Really weird. Because it thinks it's Hadrian's Villa, but it's not.
Hadrian's Villa.
Yeah.
But you must be. I mean, you mentioned your wife as a filmmaker? Does she have, from my limited experience of one wife, and me being quite dominant, and having an idea about the house that I'm living in, which is in need of slow restoration as money becomes available, there's a communication. Does your wife get to leverage some of this? I guess what I'm asking is that
this is Yeah, this is a very public forum for this conversation.
Well, so my question is my question is in fact to do with the social aspect of this. Because there's the way that you're describing it, it's a very clear unfolding of a spatial and material and psychological cultural vision. But I guess where do people sit within this? Is it just in their encounter and appreciation of it, or does it have some kind of is it responsive to kind of need, desire, values that go beyond the aesthetic, beyond the designerly? I don't know. Is it a home? I suppose the question
it's a really, really awkward question.
Thank you.
What am I going to say? No or yes?
Yeah, exactly.
There's a table outside. Is that what you want to know?
Is there a loo? That's all. Yeah. Is there running water in a loo? No.
I think it's a really good question, and you know what? It's a really good question because one spends a lot of time on whatever project, doing it for clients, whatever way it goes, and in the end of the day, they still must somehow take responsibility for it somehow on their own terms, and they have to do that. So the kind of engagement with this thing, I have two children as well, is really, really interesting, and I think it's an ongoing process actually, that they find their way into the kind of ownership of parts of it, because it's dad's project. Is it dad's project? I mean, is dad, dad, it's the architect's project. How do I live in the architect's project? I mean, that's a really big question. Going back to Farnsworth, for instance, I hope so, but I couldn't answer that for them. I mean, we are living like this is actually kind of challenging in other ways. It's wonderful, but it's also kind of challenging. The utilities are in a separate building. All of that stuff. It's full of teenagers.
That's a victory. That's a victory.
Yeah, it's full of them. But I don't know. Let's see. I mean, it's kind of wonderful. But Judy would always say, "Oh, the stuff you do is very awkward. It's very awkward."
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about going back to the Robin Walker place. It's a beautiful idea, but when it's raining in mid-November and one of the children has got norovirus, the idea of skittering across a slightly muddy courtyard to go to the loo, 14 times a night, suddenly becomes. I suppose another way of asking the question is it trying to do domesticity and dwelling in a new way? Is it challenging that idea of what constitutes home, what constitutes
years ago, like when I was, I don't know, 20 or whatever, I went to Bohugri first, and I remember just kind of going, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah,
because I grew up around. I grew up in suburbia, but my grandparents and so on, they were all from farming backgrounds, and so it was a house and a haggard and sheds. And actually, the relationship between the house and the sheds was, because they were working farmers, small farmers, they were close enough, actually, in some ways. So that kind of made a huge amount of sense to me. And all the boons are there. without a question. And in the management of the other pieces, they actually become very, very interesting. They actually become really interesting. So you have the washing machines and in a shed, and it's open, and you go, oh, well, that's great in the summer, but in the winter, it's not about rain because it's covered. It's about wind. So you plant or you make a big door, and so the whole thing, every time that something like this comes up, like it's always like, the way to the bedroom, is this the best way? This should be a court, how do we make this beautiful? What's comfortable? And each one of those problems, and there's those small problems, becomes another kind of fascination about how that architecture is used.
Mm.
So I'm not. I think it'll be interesting to see where it is when it turns out, when all the plants are up and so on. But I'm not kind of fearful of that. But I do think that it does actually suggest that we could relax a little bit on how we make our houses. A little bit, big time. I think we could save a lot of anxiety about junctions and connections and so on, and really start to understand our weather a little bit better and what it means for you. And there's a whole well-being thing we could, you could extrapolate there, and being a little bit hardier and so on could save us a lot of trouble. Like, I mean, the whole Shomer thing, or we have here, but I'm sure you have it in England too, about people buying, basically ready-made rooms and putting them in their back gardens, and they become home offices, and so the remote working happens and all of that. And I think that that's really, really fascinating and really healthy and really, really good and smart. And I think that the way that our allocation of private space and so on, and how we can, without it becoming more product, but actually really engaging with even the design life of a shed. If you could get a good shed, if you could get really the kind of idea of doing it once and it being a property and so on, and then it being an asset, and then it having a value, and that it has to be, then it's changed up or changed down. Of course, that's understandable, and that's the way it's constructed. But actually, it is, and it's all about the valuation of time ultimately. And it can be viewed as a tyranny, and it can be unpicked slightly, I think. I'm not suggesting, I'm not proselytizing in any way, but I think that how we dwell and how much of our lives we spend paying for how and where we dwell, and what the quality of that is actually worth thinking about. Like, COVID and all of that business, but I don't know, here now, people are swimming in the sea all year round. People never swam in the sea before. Or people are drinking water all the time. People never drank water. There is an awful lot of stuff that's changing, actually, really, really radically, under our noses, through our own force of mind, or what we think is better. So I think the jury, I'd leave the jury out on whether this is silly or not. Of course, I'm aware that it is silly sometimes too, but it's also it's great fun to watch, and it's really interesting to see how it works, and will it turn out right, or what is, the Swiss Family Robinson version of it.
I've been thinking about the idea of acedia or Acadia, of boredom,
Yeah,
quite a lot recently, because I think one of the characteristics of late capitalist society, if this is late capitalism, my gut feeling is it's only just got started. But anyway, we call it late capitalism because that's what they say in the papers. Is that it's boring. Fundamentally, it's boring, and people are bored, and so they're finding outs for their boredom. And one of the outs is internet, and one of the outs is, narcotics, and another out is drinking too much, and so on. There's millions of them, antidepressants. But I wonder whether a project like yours, because I was going to ask about its scalability as a kind of model of architectural production, but I don't think that's a relevant question because just from what you've said. But I wonder whether for someone like yourself, and certainly it seems very alluring to someone like me. I would never describe it as silly, by the way. That was not a word that was crossing my mind. But like an every day becomes a potential day of creative, imaginative world making, which means that no day can possibly be boring if you've got the energy to engage with it, which I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's exactly it.
Fantastic. Well, we'll finish there. Thank you, Tom.
That was fun.
That was fun.
Power springs up, as Hannah Arendt said. So does Tom. Thanks to him for taking time to speak with me and for the beautiful book, Desert. You'll find marks of Tom all over the internet, and there are a few links in the podcast description which you may look at, including 2 talks on the subject of this conversation, and to Desert's very own Instagram page, as well as to Paor Architect's website. Thanks for listening.